none, please stand for bearers of the current government document. Thank you and good evening, everyone. Before proceeding, there is space in the anteroom just next door with a big screen. If anybody wants to watch proceedings and there's no seating available, there's that option next door if you're just around the other side there. To open proceedings tonight, I'd like to call on Father Peter O'Loughlin from the Bellerive Lindsay Farm Catholic Parish to welcome us with prayer. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first time I've been to the council this year, so a happy and productive new year to everyone. The other night I sat up and watched the eclipse, and I couldn't help but marvel about the beauty of nature and the consistency of it, how the astronomers can predict when it'll happen again and all that. It made me think about how fortunate we are. Made me also think about how I like David Attenborough's programs explaining so much to us how the world is the way it is today. And so it made me think then even more of how important people are, people that certainly do the many things in the world and look after so many aspects. And so we pray tonight for all those who have responsibility that they would always strive to do the very best they can for their communities, aware that not everything will please everybody, but aware also that in the long run we all have to move ahead using the things that God has given us, but at the same time being careful that we support one another. We ask that this year may be a productive year, a year of progress, a year of growth and a year of community spirit. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Before proceeding, I'd like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on tonight, and pay respects to elders past and present. And also remind everyone that tonight's proceedings are being audio-visually recorded and will be on the website later this week. Thank you. Declare the meeting open and note apologies from Alderman Hume and Alderman Von Berto. Item 2, confirmation of minutes for the meeting on the 15th of January as circulated be taken as read and confirmed. Thank you. And seconded Alderman Pearce. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. There's nothing to report at item 3. Item 4, the Council notes the workshops conducted on the 22nd and 29th of January and the agenda briefing on the 2nd of February. Alderman Thurley, Alderman Pearce, thank you. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 5, declarations of interest of Alderman or close associate. There being none. Item 6, tabling of petitions. There are none on the agenda. Are there any from the floor? Thank you. Item 7, public question time. There are no matters on notice. Are there any questions from members of the public without notice? Yes. Please come forward.
Sachi Yasuda, Malana Road, Lindisfarne. Mr Mayor, I was just wondering, I know at the last meeting the question was raised around the audio-visual record for the meeting. Just further to that, I wonder whether there might be an opportunity for the council to consider the acoustics in this room and the speakers and things, because as we see tonight, there's a lot of people who have come and there's people who are having to rely on the video next door. But often it's very hard to hear what's going on at the back, especially the aldermen whose backs are facing towards us.
Well, thank you for the question. We will take it on notice and note that your comments about being hard to hear. Yeah. So we'll see what we can do about that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from members of the public? Thank you. Item 8, deputations by members of the public. General Manager.
Yes, Mr Mayor. We have one speaker this evening, Mr Ray Leonard of South Arm, who wishes to address Council in relation to the South Arm Master Plan. Mr Leonard, come forward.
As you're coming forward, I do need to remind you that under meeting procedures I can only offer 3 minutes, and there'll be a 2.5 minute warning.
Mr Mayor, Alderman, my name is Ray Leonard. I reside at 3155 South Arm Road, South Arm. I wish to speak to the development application for the South Arm Oval Master Plan and the inclusion of the skate park. I would like to make it clear that I'm not against providing spaces for young people in the community and the development of recreation amenities for the community as a whole. I've been a resident of South Arm for more than 30 years. In that time I've seen a need for community spaces and welcome development for the whole community, young and old. That being said, I'm deeply concerned about the proposal to build a skate park of the size and footprint indicated in the latest draft of the South Arm Oval Master Plan. My concerns are threefold: the choice of location and the impact on users and residents, the social return on investment, the financial implications for the master plan and the South Arm area. Location. Site selection is the key. Skate park experts all agree on this. Experts suggest starting with a list of at least 10 to 20 possible sites, or at least one, more than one, is the case. These are experts. Because a site is convenient, it does not make it the most appropriate location. Key considerations should be, again, this is from advocates and experts, accessibility, visibility, how visible it is, activity, how many different types of activities happen. Access. When considering access, it is important to consider proximity to the main road and public transport for ease of access. The proposed site is set well off the main South Arm Road and is not visible to through traffic. Public transport to South Arm is limited, so access for those even at Opossum Bay and other communities is problematic. Visibility. More important than access is the visibility of the park. By visibility, skate park advocates mean catering for the safety and security of park users, especially young children. Experts suggest considering whether the park can be clearly seen from the nearest main road, be subject to passing activity, i.e. people on the way to other things, be a social location that encourages contact between skaters and the general public. Activity. Activities related to visibility. It is the key. Experts say the site should already have lots of stuff going on in and around. The proposed location does not see a lot of sustained, continual activity. It is most certainly not a location that people frequently pass through on their way to somewhere else, which goes back to the issue of safety and security. These are just some of the factors that are crucial when considering the long-term, multi-generation viability of a skate park. So the conclusion, the selected site does not meet with any of these criteria as determined by expert skate proponents.
Thank you. I'm afraid we are out of time.
Just finish?
No, I'm sorry, you are out of time. I can't let it go over. What you're able to do is leave your notes with us. I'll make sure they're circulated.
I have circulated the notes to the Alderman. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
No further speakers, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Item 8 is motion. Item 9 is motions on notice and new items. Item 10, reports from outside bodies. 10.1 from single and joint authorities. There's Southern Tasmanian Council's Authority and the December reports pending. The Copping Refuse Disposal Site Joint Authority, I note the report's still pending, but Alderman Campbell, is there anything to report?
No, the report will be tabled at the next meeting of the authority on the 1st of March.
Thank you. And I note the Tasmanian Water Corporation December quarterly report is there, and there's a recommendation that that the report be received. I have a movement sector, please. Alderman Chong and Alderman Cusick. Thank you. Any discussion on the Taswater report? Okay, so I'll put the motion that it be received. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 10.2, reports from Council and Special Committees and other representative bodies. First of all, we've got the audit panel, that the chairperson's report be received.
I move, Mr. Mayor.
Seconded Alderman Cusick. Do you wish to speak to it at all?
No, I think that the report is fairly self-explanatory. There is obviously later in the agenda some discussion about the charter and also about a new member for the audit panel, so we'll probably have further discussions on that later.
Any other discussion? Alderman Jones.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. On the recommendation on unnumbered page on the minutes of the audit panel, it says that the Corporate Treasurer be requested to provide a closing report on stage 1 of Project 55 once it's been completed by the project team. Through you to the Corporate Treasurer, does that include a representation to Council with regard to any possible increase in funding for this project?
Carter?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I wouldn't anticipate that. The purpose of that report is a close-out report to the audit panel. It will certainly deal with a range of matters, including the financial position of the budget relative to the project, but it actually falls outside of the audit panel to consider budgetary matters.
Motion that the report be received. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Are there any other reports from special committees and other representative bodies? There being none, the item 11.1, that the information contained in the weekly briefing reports of the 15th, 22nd and 29th of January be noted. Thank you, Alderman McFarlane. Second, Alderman Pearce. Is there any discussion on the weekly briefing reports? In that case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. At this stage, I'd like to, given the public interest in the South Arm Master Plan, I'm willing to entertain a procedural motion that the item be brought forward rather than hold everyone here for all the planning items. Alderman McDonald.
I'd like to move a procedural motion to that effect.
Thank you.
Item 11.5.2 is brought forward to this time frame before our planning authority meeting starts.
Seconded Alderman Cusick. Being a procedural motion, there's no debate. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Alderman McFarlane.
I'd like to move that 11.5.2, the South Arm Oval Revised Master Plan, and its 4 recommendations are supported by Council.
Have a seconder, please. Alderman Thurley, thank you.
So, Council has, since 2015, been looking at a draft master plan for the South Arm area. In 2015, there was 198 returns for submissions to Council supporting that particular draft. June the 10th saw stage 1 with the gym equipment installed. June the 21st saw a planning permit and a construction of a multi-use hard stand area given. This had a skateboard park as part of that hard stand area. May the 11th saw a minor amendment sought to move the skate park by 2 metres due to infrastructure problems, and May the 29th saw a workshop discussing these issues and the proceeding of a tender process for the skate park. July the 19th reviewed the design that had come back from the previous problems, and that report came back by the 31st of July. And then in November, the revised plan was sent out for another consultation. That was to finish on the 21st of December. and 190 representations were returned and 75% of these were in agreement with the changes. So there was a majority support at the end of that to a very extensive consultation. Tonight's application is purely an extension of a previous approval on a permit for a skateboard park. This application tonight is supported by the local community to a large degree, and at this point in time the council in its discussions has technically approved further allocation of finances to ameliorate any problems with noise in the future. But at this point in time we haven't had a noise report that substantially, for me, from my personal perspective, substantially provides any justification for a refusal. Within the context of the future development of the noise attention wall, if it's necessary, I would anticipate that council would endorse the allocation of money fairly quickly for that event if it's necessary. At this point in time, there has been a lot of work by the local youth and other supportive parents in providing a asset for the local children to create their own social environment. This is not a asset that hasn't been provided to other suburbs within our municipality, and consequently when we look at the justifications for not having it in this place, I find them difficult to uphold due to the fact that this area is already being used in many ways as a central activity area. I seek all of this support.
Shirley?
Mayor, we heard a representation tonight which, taken on face value and in any other location, might stand up. But we're talking about South Arm. We're talking about a location which encompasses a Possum Bay, which will be accessible for youth from Clifton Beach, from Cremorne, even Lauderdale. We're talking about a holiday destination too that attracts a mammoth amount of young people. And I would love to see them have something really active to do when they're there. And it's not the fault of the proponents of this skate park that it now stands before us being discussed once again. And I am a little disappointed that we have taken so long to actually get this there for the community. The main opponents base it on the fact that there could be noise, adverse noise, disruptive noise. The sounds of young people enjoying themselves, to me, is not disruptive. The sound of a skateboard is not necessarily excessively noisy, and we have every intention of monitoring that once the skate park is in operation. Possibly 3 locations, and all of those would have attracted additional protest or some adverse comments, because no matter where you try to put anything these days, there's always voices of discontent. So I think we are looking at putting a park in the other end of our municipality, which can actually provide such a draw card, an additional draw card to this area. And you will find with our public transport system, we might even have to put an additional bus trip on, because it will be very popular. And it's a good thing. It's good to have children, young people from adolescent age in particular, to have a real focus and be active. So what alternatives do we want them to do? Yes, we've got beautiful swimming facilities and boating opportunities and kayaking and so forth, but on the ground we haven't got that much to offer. That space at the moment is an arid piece of land, hardly utilised for anything, and you know, we don't need to be negative about these things. We need to encourage young people to be involved and to be highly active, and it's such a skillful thing to be doing. It's an extremely skillful, and I walk past the skate park next to Elizabeth College quite often, and it's a fantastic atmosphere there. There are little people, there are little ones there on their scooters, right up to the really good, you know, skateboarders. And we've got the facility at Rosny, yes, but we're going to provide something at this end of our municipality, and I think it's absolutely wonderful.
Look, it's really, really unfair on people. This chamber has to consider both sides of every argument. Some people don't want this, and in the interest of procedural fairness, it's essential that people can voice their concerns and arguments without fear or favour. So I would please ask you not to intercede in that way. Other speakers, please. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In the actual council report, it does say on page 282, it is intended for a new development application to be submitted for council to seek a change of the hours of use to daylight hours only. In other words, if the recommendation tonight is carried, and that is that council adopts the South Arm revised master plan as the master plan set out in attachment 1, it means that the council is basically locked into place having this skate park in the location as per the revised master plan. That is basically what will happen if a recommendation that's been moved by Alderman McFarlane, seconded by Alderman Cusick, is accepted by the council. Because, as I've just said, a development application will be raised, it will be advertised, but the only basis on which representations can be made to council are on the basis of the daylight hours of operation. And that is really what it comes down to in this particular situation.
I need to make a correction there. When it goes out to be advertised, under the planning law, there are many areas where it can be challenged. It's not just the location, Alderman James. I just need to remind you of that.
But what I'm saying to you, Mr Mayor,
I wouldn't want to prejudice the planning process by suggesting that that's the only reason.
But in the officer's report it says that the only matter that can be raised in the development application is the hours of operation. That is the only matter that can be raised and decided upon within this DA, which if it's approved by council. Going on, the point about the location of this, and I sent an email today to one of the spokespersons of a large community group, and I accept that. And I said in that email that I believe that the location is inappropriate. I'm not opposed to having a skateboard park in South Arm, but I believe we have other locations in which we could actually further follow up. And one of those is in fact with the Department of Education's land in the South Arm Primary School. That hasn't been followed up to the extent to which I thought it could have done. And we've already entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Clarence High School over use and payment and what we have spent in relation to those education facilities and shot put and the actual the junior athletics and so on that have actually come into this memorandum of understanding with the Department of Education and also the Clarence City Council. I believe that if we don't go through the process of making sure that we have exhausted every possible avenue with regard to a site, a location for the skateboard park, then I think it's going to continue to be an issue, which can be unfortunate, because there is a group of people in the community that want to see a skateboard park in South Arm, and I for one want to see that, but at the same time not in that location which has been identified in the revised master plan. I don't need to go into any more detail, Mr Mayor, but if this recommendation is adopted tonight and Part B says that Council adopts the South Arm Oval revised master plan as set out in attachment 1, which shows the location of the skateboard park, and modified by Part A, which says the removal of the bollards at the Calvin Hall surrounds and the fitness park. But the endorsement of the revised master plan says that is where the skateboard park will be, and the development application will only be basically identifying the actual hours of operation, and that is all. And that is what the DA will entail, and it will not preclude the skateboard park being located in the area as per the adoption of the revised master plan.
Other speakers? Alderman Cusick.
I think it's Alderman Jones is correct when he says that we accept we accept that approving this master plan gives a go ahead for DA for the skate park. Is the location of the skate park ideal? Probably not. Is a skate park needed or desirable? Yes. There have been numerous workshop discussions on this. Community consultation is outlined by Alderman McFarlane, and it's time to make a decision. No such proposal is perfect, nor can we expect 100% community acceptance. But let's support the use of that region, and so on balance, I support this revised master plan.
Alderman Chong, and then Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's taken us almost 5 years to get to this place, which is really hard to imagine, except when I think back how many times we've done consultation, we've had workshops, how many discussions we've had around the skate park and the master plan in general. Look, I would agree with Alderman Cusick. Yes, perhaps it's not an ideal place, but I know that the officers and we have considered a number of other locations in the area, and this is the best of all of them. No, it won't suit everybody. Of course it won't. But it is much the best place to put it. And this master plan gives us a range of things and a range of activities available, of which the skate park is only one of them, but a very important part of it. The young people who live in South Arm, they're not travelling backwards and forwards to go there. It's not going to be somewhere that you expect to get a lot of people travelling to go to, not like the skate park in Rosny, which is a regional hub, if you like, that people will go to. This is for the people who live in the area. For them it's important, it's central, it's a location they can get to, and it's accessible. And I think this ticks all of those boxes for the people who live in South Arm, and I think Council should support this.
Yes?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, can I raise another point? Point 14 on the heading is South Arm Oval Revised Master Plan. And at the moment we've talked about skateboard ramps, etc., etc. So just remind all of them of point 14. It's proposed min shed. Proposed min shed. Why I raise that, and some of you may not realise what a min shed is. It's where mainly men, but there are more women coming through, and it's a shed where normally you do some woodwork or metal work. And I had a person I met with yesterday. He said, "Where's the men's shed going to be at South Arm?" I showed him the master plan. Didn't even know about it. And he said, "Fantastic," he said, "because I've got some tools I'll donate if we can get it up." He said, "I know some traders who'll donate tools." And we went through the master plan, and I said, "Yeah, you realise you're going to be near probably a skateboard ramp," and his words were fantastic. Fantastic, because what they're trying to do in men's sheds is get school groups in as well, and older young adults of younger adults, but coming through, and as I said, it's not only me, Mick Shed's a bad name because there's a lot of women doing this. Now, we'll go back to the skate park. And look, I agree with Alderman Cusick, it may not be in a perfect position. I would like to see it out in the open like Rosny College, but I think Alderman Barnwell fairly said, our officers have looked at the sites. Their officers have looked for a better site. And this site they've chosen, I went down to the AGM of SAFRA and they showed us the site. We had a look, we had a walk around with other aldermen. And I'm convinced that this site is a damn good site, because we can't find anything better. And I really think when you look at that, and people are excited it's going there, and I was really surprised, I was really wrapped at the person with the men's shed said, great, that's where we want to be, where things are happening. And I really think it's in a great position, not perfect, but it is close to a bus route, it's close to everything, it's close to shops, and I don't have any hesitation in sending this revised plan, supporting this revised plan.
Mr. Mayor, Plastic Fantastic, Action Sport, Mike McGill, Neil Blender, Original Mullins Freestyle, Jeff Kendall, Chris Miller, Nicky Guerrero, Janita. I'm not talking in tongues. These are all the skateboards that I've had in my life. And when you really enjoy skateboarding, it's almost the fondness that you have for a car that you buy as well. Skateboarding has been a significant part of my life, from junior school, through high school, overseas travel, and undergraduate study. Many fond memories. It's a form of joy, a form of transport, and it can be both. Speaking of fond memories, it's over a quarter of a century ago I got to see Tony Hawk perform just down there at Rosny, which was amazing. Look, I've got no joy in, again for the second time, opposing this master plan and doing so with big concerns around the skate infrastructure that it proposes. For me, it's open and shut case that this is the wrong location. And whilst other aldermen have said other things have been investigated, and this is a good location, no, this is what's been determined by looking forensically as the least worst. And it's really important as somebody that's passionate about skateboarding that infrastructure is put in the right place, because when it's put in the wrong place, it makes it so much harder to again make the case to be it in the right place. And this council has formed. In the case of Risdon Vale and Gilston Bay, we got it wrong. In the case of Rosny, we did get it right. Rosny was centrally located to service the municipality as a whole and people coming in. Rosny has high visibility. And Rosny, being close to the highway, there is a higher level of ambient background noise. So the impact, it just isn't great. In fact, no one since Rosny's opened has raised the problem of noise with me as a concern, but other areas have. So either way tonight, a significant section of the wonderful South Arm community isn't going to like the outcome. And for me, South Arm is paradise. And rather than try and make South Arm like everybody else, or everywhere else rather, we should be trying to focus on what is so special about it. And for me, obviously the beaches are a given, the easy, laid-back lifestyle, but separate to this, as far as the social capital goes, the Calvin, the Hall, the South Arm Oval is like a village green of times past. It's a place of socialising, a place of activity in that sense, but also it really is day-to-day an incredibly quiet area. And as somebody that knows skateboarding, has spent so much of his life skateboarding in concrete skateboard parks, one skateboard can create a lot of noise, but 2, 3, 4 doesn't actually double it. The impact is often there when it's being used specifically in a quiet area. So in the very unlikely event that this motion doesn't get up tonight, I foreshadow an alternate that wouldn't have the park in this area, but would preserve the funding for further skateboard infrastructure. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that it doesn't, that it isn't a problem and isn't deleterious, but I just feel as somebody that's had such an experience skateboarding over his life that it will. and it's so much concrete that the costs to remove it are probably going to be even more than the cost to actually build it if we do get it wrong. I'll ask you to reflect on what makes South Arm and that area great at the moment, because I think it's really under threat.
By Alderman McFarlane.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I appreciate the input from fellow aldermen. As members of the public might not be aware of the in-depth conversations we've had across a large period of time and within the workshop environment as well. I mean, this application has been resubmitted after previous approvals, so technically from my perspective it was just looking at realigning it, and I did not expect some of the input from local residents to the changes and also to its application. For those who oppose the location in its present position, I believe that at the council level there's been plenty of time for any other alderman to firm up other options in the area, when I know that the staff have over time consistently assessed other areas. We have had discussions at workshops on other areas, and we have not been able to find another location that fits the ideology of having a centrally located access for young people to participate in a social sport that they find pleasurable. This is the right place for this particular type of infrastructure. It will have other groups using the area. There will be older participants doing other activities in the area. I'm sure that as time goes by, the skateboard park participants may interact with the local community centre. For me, skateboard parks are usually associated adjacent to community centres. In response to Alderman James's comments on the change of hours and a DA coming forward, that is only a technicality. It's not an excuse or a reason to open the discussion about whether the skateboard park should be there or not again. I'd like to follow up on Alderman Pearson's comments about the men's shed, because in the past I think that the interaction between the older gentlemen and the younger ones could actually be beneficial in this area, seeing they're such a long way from town. They can have special skateboard park repair sessions, and I would suggest that there could be some manufacturing activities happening in the shed. So looking forward to a much more revitalised community with opportunities to expand on the uses of the skateboard park and its interaction in the broader community, and I feel that if a bit of effort and time is put into the integration of this, we will see a wonderful outcome.
So the motion before the Chair is the officer's recommendation, which is to adopt the revised master plan minus bollards and the fitness path. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Thank you. Now advised that Council intends to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act.
But you don't have to stay.
I'll just wait for a couple of minutes for the gallery to clear. Item 11.3.1 is a development application at 69A Howrah Road for a dwelling. Moved Alderman McFarlane, seconded Alderman Chong. If we just close the door there, please. Jill, if we could close the door, please. Sorry, that was moved. Alderman McFarlane, would you like to speak to the motion?
I support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Alderman Chong.
No, thank you, Mr Chair.
Other speakers? In the absence of any discussion, I'll put the motion for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.2 is a development application for 69 Connemara Place, Sanford. Moved Alderman Campbell, second Alderman Pearce. Do you wish to speak to it? Alderman Pearce. Any other speakers? Motion for approval. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 11.3.3 is a development application at 624 Cambridge Road for an outbuilding. Alderman Turley.
I have an alternate motion which I've circulated amongst fellow aldermen. It reiterates the original motion with an additional advice.
I ask if we have a seconder, please. Alderman Pearce, thank you.
Do
Please
I
continue.
need to read that?
Look, if you would, and then speak to it,
Okay.
please.
That council adopts the officer's recommendation subject to the addition of the following advice. Noise emissions from the building must not create a nuisance for other people and are regulated by the Environmental Management and Pollution Control, in brackets Noise Regulations 2016, and the Environmental Management and Pollution Control Act 1994, in brackets EMPCA. Both can be viewed at www.legislation.cas.gov.au browse in force. B, that the reasons for Council's decision in respect of this matter be recorded as follows. There have been concerns raised about the noise from the property, and it is appropriate that the developer is made aware that in using the outbuilding for domestic purposes, that unreasonable noise levels associated with the use of the building must be controlled.
Alderman Pearce, would you like to speak to the motion?
I think Alderman Thermos summed it up beautifully. We discussed this on Friday, and I think that was very well handled.
Who? Other speakers? Alderman James.
Look, I just seek guidance through you to Mr. Lovell, and Mr. Lovell, the recommendation that was actually provided in our agenda has not obviously got the advice section within it, and so my question through the Mayor to you is that, do we do this as a matter of course, or are we doing this on the basis that there has been some representations and we need to sort of spell it out that controls are not with council but through EMPA?
So, Mr Mayor, it is unusual that this advice would be put, but that was the reason that you announced out what was discussed by the member. Yes.
Subsequent to that, look, I, for 1 minute, don't want to put the dampener on this because I think it's important, but as I said on Friday, council has its own means by which, under delegation, to handle noise and other problems that have noise emissions from buildings and so on and so forth. I just want to make sure that if we are going to add this clause in here, that we are not necessarily setting a precedent for down the track, because there are many, many instances within council, and I alluded to one on Friday at our briefing when this was discussed, that it's okay to say that we are providing advice, but this is actually part of the decision of council. And it's a bold move for us to be able to say, in my view, that we are advising the applicant that it must not create a nuisance. for other people. And this is not regulated by council, but it's regulated by another government authority. So I'm just hesitant in supporting this, because I can see down the track that another applicant may come forward with air conditioning units, playing their music loudly and so on and so forth, and therefore the response from council is that, well, we are not the agency that is actually able to actually monitor this. It's part of the state government authority, and so I'm just a little bit unsure, Mr. Mayor, as to why we are doing this when in fact our environmental health officer has delegation through the state authority to be able to issue an infringement notice in the event or on the event of where a noise exceeds certain levels within, and from any particular equipment, whether it's from a band playing its musical instruments or from an air conditioning or from playing loud music. I'm just unsure as to why we should be doing this, and I think it may set a precedent down the track when we have another application coming forward that this advice will be put in or will be considered, and if it is, okay, but then again, this is one issue which I think it may not occur, and it may not be provided to anybody else who has concerns about noise and the appropriate agency that is to monitor it.
Yeah, other speakers. Alderman Walker.
Well, there may be some other debate that happens after I sit down that inspires me along the way, but my intention is probably to abstain in this matter, on the basis that this I consider as an unreasonable encroachment. I understand the intent to have some merit, but again, with intent, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and I think this is just setting us down a path. What will be next with other applications? What are we going to condition if there's a tattoo parlour? Must not park 30 Harley Davidsons and bring some unusual chemicals or something like that. The provisions are there. It's not germane to this specific application, and it shouldn't be included, is the way that I feel about it. So if it's unsuccessful, I'll move the motion as originally tabled.
Alderman Chong.
I'm puzzled, I have to admit. I am ambivalent about the advice being in there, but my understanding reading it is advice. It is not a condition of the application. We're not saying this is what you must do, we're saying this is advice, this is where the legislation sits if there's a problem. Am I correct in that? Would that be a reasonable assumption? This is just advice only, this isn't, and then thou shalt enforce it.
outside of the permit process, drawing your attention to something that will happen anywhere.
Could happen anywhere at any time. This would be the appropriate legislation. So, well, I mean...
Let's keep the debate rather structured, please, Alderman Jones.
So I guess from that point of view, I see no disadvantage in having it in there. It's not setting a precedent, it's not putting unnatural conditions on a particular development, so I can't see the harm in having it there.
The question's been raised whether it's unusual, and it may be unusual, but it's not without precedent. In fact, looking ahead at 11.3.5, we're providing advice that someone needs to maintain records in relation to the length of stays. I mean, to provide it, please don't interrupt, Alderman James. It is not out of the ordinary to provide advice in all sorts of different areas. Other speakers? Right to reply, Alderman Thurley.
Mr Mayor,
I was obviously at the workshop where I asked and sought advice as to how I would handle a situation where an adjacent neighbour has been subjected to significant noise levels as a result of loud music being played and band practice. Then when you come across an application to build a bigger shed, a bigger venue for what could possibly be band practice, this is a piece of advice to anybody in the area and anybody who is in a similar situation to know what legislation they need to draw upon if they've got issues. Now, I am a little surprised that Alderman James has actually not supporting someone who is having issues, because he's usually on the side of someone that's got issues.
Let's keep focused on the issue itself rather than on what the Alderman... No, you can't. And please, I mean, it does happen, Alderman James. I've seen it.
It was just a comment, but it was an observation. It's an observation, but a fairly accurate one. And this is purely a piece of advice, and it's not setting a precedent because there's been other pieces of advice issued. This is just this particular context, and I think it's very important that when we're looking at approving structures, that we actually take into account the context with which they're being built and not just isolated. This is a reasonable pieces of land involved here, and there's already been representations from the person most affected by this development. So it is reasonable to provide some advice in relation to the possible outcome.
Thank you. So the motion before the Chair is the officer's recommendation as amended by some advice. All those in favour? Against? Carried. 11.3.4 is a development application of 56 Silwood Avenue, Howrah for a dwelling, alterations and additions. Moved Alderman McFarlane. Seconded Alderman Cusick. Would you like to speak to it?
Put the recommendation.
Thank you. Alderman Cusick.
Say, Mr Mayor, that if there have been representation issues on privacy, visual impact and overshadowing, and I think the officers have answered those satisfactorily, so I support the recommendation.
Absence of any, I'll put the motion for approval. All those in favour? Against? Carried. 11.3.5, development application at 59 Hanslow Road, Cambridge for visitor accommodation. Thank you, Alderman Chong. Seconded Alderman Walker. Would you like to speak?
No, I support the officer's recommendation, including the advice.
Thank you. Alderman Walker.
Yes, look, as per Alderman Chong, and we note that this sort of accommodation is something that's needed in the area and the wider municipality. So it's a robust and quite intelligent proposal for a piece of existing infrastructure as well. So
yes. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Just picking up on the advice section within this particular motion, it's very interesting that the advice that's been provided here is very important advice, in fact, because if you were to proceed in this area to build building and it wasn't for visitor accommodation, then you wouldn't get the permit. As simple as that. You wouldn't get the permit because of the zoning. In this case, they have applied for visitor accommodation, and there is, in a sense, a bit of a loophole. I use that in inverted commas because it will allow visitor accommodation provided it meets certain conditions, whereas if you were making an application for a normal building, you wouldn't be allowed. So in this particular case, I just want to make this quite clear, Mr Mayor, why the advice is important and perhaps not necessarily important in the last case, because this condition is spelling out to the people or to the applicants that if in the future it becomes necessary to confirm the nature of the use of the building, it is advised that you maintain records in relation to the length of the stays the length of the stays and or the number of bookings per year. Because if it becomes a normal residence, then it's not allowed. And the council is making sure that the advice is provided in relation to visitor accommodation, which I believe is absolutely essential, Mr. Mayor, essential in this case, because if, and only if they decide to change the nature and the use of this, then they have to shut it, and it cannot be used for any other purpose other than visitor accommodation. So record keeping, like anything in our day and age, we need record keeping as a means to support an application. That is why it's essential that the advice section be here included. And in this instance, I support the recommendation. Early?
Mr. Mayor, I raised concerns at the when we were discussing this at our agenda briefing lunch, purely because I know that the original, well, I may be wrong, but the original intention may be to have built a residence. Is that correct, Mr. Lovell? We don't know. And this was an alternate approach to getting some building on that piece of land?
Oh God, that's a bit rough.
As a point of order,
No.
we can only deal with the application that's before us, irrespective of what people have rumoured in terms of noise or use.
Sorry, I wasn't referring to this specific application.
Point of order?
I think it's really, Alderman James, please be quiet. It is really important we stick to this planning application as it says.
Okay, well, I was probably applying it to a broader context because my mind goes in tangents when I think about things like this. And that advice is not just advice, it's actually essential for that person, the applicant, to do that. Because unless records are kept, and unless there is proof that this is used for visitor accommodation, there is no way that this could be approved otherwise. And what I'm saying, it's not necessarily setting any precedent as such, but it's actually in this particular case, I think it actually could have been part of the conditions, but instead of the fine.
I think we're in furious agreement, but are there any other speakers? A right of reply?
Support the officer's recommendation and hope everyone else does too.
Okay, so the recommendation is approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.6 is a development application at 52 Marinda Street, Ara, for a deck. Thank you, Alderman Jones. Do we have a seconder, please?
And I'll move
Alderman
it.
Chong, I think.
And in favour of the recommendation, I think it's fairly straightforward. There isn't too many, as I would call it, bones of contention, and seek council support. How's that?
Thank you, Alderman Jones. Seconder would like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Other speakers? No need for right of reply, Alderman Jones. I'll put the motion for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.7 is a development application at 68 Malana Road, Lindisfarne, for 3 multiple dwellings. Thanks, Alderman Cusick. Seconder, Alderman Walker. Alderman Cusick, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, this seems to be an appropriate development for this area. It's a large block, it's 1,100, over 1,100 square metres, and the proposal for 3 multiple dwellings seems appropriate. I know the area, and almost next door to this there are multiple dwellings have been constructed in the last 3 or 4 years, so I support council's support on this.
Thank you. Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, it is indeed a pretty sizable block, and there have been, in this part of Malana Road, several applications for such proposals over recent years. We are a planning authority, so all minor road applications are equal, or at least should be treated equal. So I'm wondering just how many votes this one will receive.
Other speakers? Alderman Carr.
Just to note on page 163 in the comments at the end, a matter of concern to myself is that the staff have noted that overshadowing of solar panels is not a relevant consideration under the scheme, and I would hope that we would be considering looking at that in the future.
Yeah. Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman James. Oh, I'm sorry. Alderman Cusick.
Quick off the mark.
No, well, it's been a... No, thank you. I'll put the motion, which is for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried. Against? Carried. 11.3.8 is a development application for 9 Gunning Street, Richmond, internal and external building alterations for visitor accommodation. Alderman Chong.
So moved, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Second, Alderman McFarlane. Speakers?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There has been a number of discussions between the applicant and the representative, and they have come to a number of agreements which are not necessarily reflected in here that will resolve those problems. And based on that, they are all happy to support the officer's recommendation. The most important part of which, really in terms of the conditions, is dealing with the heritage of that particular building, and how it's treated and the contents in there. Like a number of buildings in Richmond, it's actually old stables. You can still see the cobbled floors and the manger on the wall, and the treatment that they're suggesting and that is to be signed off by the heritage report actually treats all that very sensitively, and I think it's good to support it.
Alderman McFarlane?
No, thank you.
Other speakers? Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In the officer's report, it does say on page 205 that the Heritage Council has approved the development and provided conditions that must be included as part of any planning permit granted by council. The layman reading that would say, okay, the Heritage Council has approved it, the development, and then provided some conditions. If we actually go to the actual attachment 4, the Heritage Council has been fairly circumspect in its decision to the council, in as much as it says, and I quote, under section 39(6)(b) of the Historic Cultural Heritage Act of 95, the Heritage Council gives notice that it consents to the discretionary permit being granted. That's a lot. That's not as definite or particular as to what is actually in the officer's recommendation. It consents, discretionary approval, and conditions. And then on attachment 4, it goes through a lot of those matters, and a photographic record must be made of the manner of the trough assembly. The elements of the manager trough assembly which are to be approved be removed, must be dismantled, removed with the least possible damage, so as enable their reinstatement as either reused or replaced. It goes on, any flagstones revealed through the works must be conserved in situ and appropriate measures taken to avoid any circumstances. The proposed concrete floors must be detailed and constructed such and such. Prior to the commencement of heritage works, the stable building must be assessed. Now, I spoke today to the manager of planning, and I was advised that Mr Chris Potter is the person who I believe is the structural assessor who is coming in. Council has not received, as my understanding, has not received that assessment from Mr Potter, and that is one of the conditions that is spelt out in the Heritage Heritage Council requirements, under the Notice of Heritage decision. Suitably qualified structural engineer prior to the commencement of the heritage work. The structural engineer report must be provided to the Heritage Tasmania, etc. The reason why I have identified that is that the residents at number 7 are concerned about the structure, and there are cracks on the exterior of the stables, and they have only occurred recently in relation to some works that have been done on the car parking area that has been established for obviously the visitor accommodation centre that is being proposed. And you can see the extent to which cracks have occurred on the external wall, and that is on obviously on number 7 Gunning Street's side of, well, it's a common boundary, that wall. That stable wall is in fact the boundary of the actual property of 9 and 7. So when we actually seek, it's my understanding, when we actually seek advice from the Tasmanian Heritage Council, it's very important that we in fact take note, and the condition that's been included within the officer's recommendation is in fact that those matters that have been raised by the THC in its attachment 4 have to be attended to and so on. And the question that I have in relation to this is that works haven't been undertaken on the visitor parking area. Heavy machinery has been brought in. Cracks have appeared in the external wall of the stables, and that has been a contributing factor from the heavy excavation equipment pounding and actually utilising and establishing the car parking area on that site. Now, whether or not the Heritage Council obviously attains this information,
thank you,
it means that the question is not right.
Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Yes, look, again, another visitor accommodation coming before us, and again with unique heritage qualities that I think through this process will indeed be preserved. And I'm quite happy to support this application and in line with the officer's recommendations.
Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. When I read the letter from the Tasmanian Heritage Council, I was actually rather pleased because I don't think they missed anything, which I think is a credit to them. I was absolutely credit to them. And that's why when I read this through thoroughly, and like Alderman James, I did have to go back and forward a few times, but I think they've done a fantastic job. I really think they've itemised everything that needs to be done. And you're right, there's cracks in the wall, but that's going to be all looked after, so I think this recommendation deserves our support.
Other speakers? Alderman Turley.
I just wanted to repeat the fact that the structural failing of the subject building is not a consideration under the scheme. However, because of the neighbours' concerns, the matter has been brought to the attention, and it's been adequately coped with within this whole report. And I don't understand why we've just spent how many minutes? 3 minutes, when it's all written before us and it's all been addressed. So I'm really quite happy with, as Mr. Pearce said, Alderman Pearce, that the report's covered it, and also within 5.6 it's been mentioned that work has to be undertaken.
Other speakers? Right, reply, Alderman Song.
Just to say thank you, Mr. Mayor, that I think the conditions and advice given in the officer's recommendation adequately cover all the areas of concern that were raised by the Heritage Council and indeed were raised by the representatives, and I think we should seek council support.
The motion is the officer's recommendation. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item 11.3.9 is the Southern Tasmanian Regional Land Use Strategy, that the Minister be advised of our concerns, ad hoc expansion and undertake major review. Thanks, Alderman Pearce. Second, Alderman Thurley, I think.
No, I think we discussed this pretty much on.
I don't. I'm very happy with our officer's recommendation, Mayor.
I'd just like to say that the third dot point there was really crucial to the outcome of our discussions on Friday at the agenda briefing meeting, because to insist and to try and push forward for an appropriate regular review in a structural manner is far preferable to any ad hoc additions that are made along the way. So this is a really good recommendation from Council.
Yes, look, it does open up a general review of Struls, and I think that's a great thing, because even though Hobart and Sorel have identified some changes to their areas, and obviously that will be considered by the Minister on his own assessment. I think he can do that, even though it's a matter that the Southern Regional Councils are party to. The beauty of this is that I would like to see, and I've said in this place on a number of occasions, I'd like to see the urban growth boundary and Struls revisited, and also to look at the Lauderdale area as part of that, together with the Acton corridor. And I've had numerous meetings with a ratepayer in that area, and it's going to reach a time when I think the boundary on Acton Road, where on one side of the road you've got 5 acre lots or 2 hectare lots, and on the eastern side of the road you have, under the old rural planning strategy which we used to have back in the 80s, that you could have a combination of small blocks as part of the large development of the area. And so you've got on one side of the road 2 hectare blocks, and then you've got 500 square metres, 1,000 square metres, and so on and so forth. And that is all basically because at the time there was no need to, or there wasn't the decision to extend. And this council tried back in the 80s to try to subdivide those blocks of 5 acres to something that's a lot smaller, but of course at that time it didn't succeed. But as time moves on and people obviously decide that the land is too big, too large, that they need to downsize, and a lot of these residents in the Acton corridor live there for 20 or 30 years, are making a decision in relation to as to whether or not they ought to leave. But many of them want to stay there, but they want to obviously downsize. So at this stage, that's not on the to be assessed. But I can see down the track that if representations are made, and if we have a return of a Liberal government, and in fact we may have these changes of urban growth boundary being considered on a more, I think, sustainable development. So I support the motion. It's very open-ended, and I think that it's worthy of Council's support.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman McFarlane.
Mayor, I wouldn't support any changes made by a planning minister. At this point in time, what we've seen within the concept of the statewide planning scheme is a whole lot of problems for a whole lot of residents. The regional land use strategies for whatever areas are not as important as reviews of the residential standards. And until the Minister and whoever else is involved in looking at these changes comprehends what those changes actually mean and how they affect people's lives, then the regional land use strategy is of no relevance. I feel if you can't comprehend how you are going to make future communities sustainable, effective and democratic in many ways from my point of view. I know that we are only being asked and given an opportunity to comment on the proposed amendment, but at this point in time I would seriously be telling the Minister that we're not interested in spending a lot of time on regional land use until we get the current residential standards ironed out, because this is only going to impact on future development, and more people's lives are going to be impacted by the very same problems we've got now.
The Alderman Pearce for a right of reply.
Look, I take on board Alderman Farland's words there, because in many ways I do totally agree with you in a lot of respects. But anyway, this motion I totally support, Mayor, and I think it deserves our support.
The recommendation is, the officer's recommendation is the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Alderman Farland's against, thank you. And that concludes our business as a planning authority. There's nothing under customer service or asset management tonight. Moving on to 11.5.1, Memorandum of Understanding with Metro, that the GM will be authorised to sign a revised version of the MOU. Thank you, Mr. Cusick. Second one, Thurley. Be all over before you get here, Ross. Alderman Cusick.
Could we replacing memorandum of understanding 55?
Just to say that anything that encourages great communication between Metro and Council, because transport is such a crucial element of what we deal to on a day-to-day basis, cannot be underestimated. So I really, really support it.
Here's now Alderman McFarlane.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I feel like this where Metro and Council agree to consult one another on issues which have significant implications for the other organisation, which, something we've wanted for ages. But I turn to the memorandum itself and where it's got Metro will. And I raise this point, and I raise it because I'll tell you why. Metro will work with Council and Tasmanian Police to improve the overall safety, functionality and effectiveness of Rosny Park bus interchange. Now, I'm not quite sure how they're going to do it, but a lot of you will know that a friend of mine got killed by a bus reversing there some 3 years ago, and I'd be very interested in how we're going to improve the overall safety. I think the buses do behave certainly in a much better fashion. I will be extremely interested in that item number 6D, Mayor.
Alderman McFarlane.
A couple of issues. I mean, for me in the past, I'm happy to have a new MOU, but in the past when I have asked Council to seek support from the Metro for a bus shelter down at Lauderdale on the foreshore there, where they have gale force winds and a very prominent doctor's surgery opposite the bus stop, where I've seen a number of older people trying to get out of the wind under trees that really have no coverage at all. There still was no bus shelter there 5 years later. And I feel that, we have the opportunity for the Metro to interact in a really positive manner with some of our community groups, like the men's sheds, for instance, where we look at the provision of seating and some shelters that are suitable, that can be, made somewhere else and taken to various locations. I find that, after 5 years, why is it so hard for these things to happen? If they don't have the money for building them themselves or having the resources to put them there, why can't they work in with other community groups that may have a wish to do so, because we've found them very supportive for us. So hopefully in our future dealings with the Metro and this MOU, I hope that that topic may be discussed.
Motion then that we authorise the GM to sign a revised MOU. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. There's nothing under financial management either tonight. Moving on to governance. 11.7.1 is the review of the audit panel charter and independent member remuneration. Alderman Chong, thank you. Seconded, Alderman Cusick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are just a couple of things to highlight. I guess a lot of the changes to the charter are reasonably cosmetic. It just came about as a periodic review. There are a couple of things that probably should be highlighted. One, as in A here, is that we endorsed a 4-year rotational appointment. Whilst the Act doesn't say how many years people should be appointed for, it does give an 8-year maximum term. So logically that's 4 years rather than the 3-year term, which is what we've been using. So, and that obviously involves a little bit of jiggling about of appointments to get that correct. The other, I guess, change that's probably worth noting is that we actually have changed the quorum provision to make sure that a quorum has a majority of the independent members there. So not just a majority of the members of the audit panel. Happy if there's any other questions on anything else, but otherwise I seek Council's support for the changes.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and can I say from the outset that I have been quoted as saying, and it got back to me from one of the members of the audit panel, that I have been quoted as saying that it's an all-powerful committee, and that took me by surprise when I heard that, and there must have been some comment made to members of the committee in relation to what I have said in this place. But anyway, if it's on the public audio visual, then that's probably where it was picked up. But can I say on page 289 that I never envisaged that this panel would become such an all-powerful committee of council, because it is. It certainly is. In the early days of this council, before it had its sort of statutory provisions, a number of us tried to get a finance committee established, and it took a long time to actually get that up and running. And I was on one of the inaugural meetings, and I enjoyed it so much. But since then, what has happened is that this, and the General Manager has reminded me on numerous occasions, that this is a special committee of council under Section 24 of the Local Government Act of 1993. And so it has certain powers and responsibilities. And if you turn to page 289, you just wonder, if I quote from section 6.2, and I quote, the audit panels have a range of responsibilities outlined in the Act and regulations to overview Council's strategic and operation finance, asset management plans, related aspects associated with Council's overall long-term financial stability and sustainability. Is there anything else? No, that's about it. Now, that's a broad brush approach to anything. This committee is an all-powerful committee. It's changed to what I think we had viewed it to be back those days. And also too, Mr Mayor, one of the key decisions that has come out of this is a recommendation for this new IT system that we're currently working through, as far as bringing all these different functions of council under the sort of cloud, if you call it that. I think you do call it that, requirements, and it's costing us a bucket. But look, at the end of the day, I think that we need to monitor the operations of this committee. I think it's sort of moving more into the realms of making decisions for council, as distinct from making recommendations for council. And in this particular case, if you do reread on page 289, 6.2, there's really not much left for us as an overriding assessment body to sort of determine as to what we believe, on the advice of the council's corporate treasurer, as to whether or not there is anything else left for us to make a decision on, other than what the audit committee can actually specify in its modus operandi.
Other speakers? Alderman Farr?
I am slightly confused with comments by Alderman James. In the context of an audit committee is a review mechanism. It's not the actual decision-making fabric of the council, and it is there to overlook the strategic and operational finance and management plans with view of checking and balancing, which a number of other councils could have used as a handy tool recently. And so for me, having sat on this committee a number of times, I find that their deliberations are very concise and orientated towards procedural fairness, really, if you want to look at it, but also good financial management is one of their basic fundamental justifications for existing. It is also technically a legislative requirement, so we can't really argue the point, and their recommendations should be taken on face value, not just pushed aside as being some kind of all-powerful statement.
Right of reply, Alderman Chong.
Thank you. Perhaps just to put right any misconceptions about the audit panel, a couple of things. Firstly, the majority of its members are actually independent, and they sit on that panel to bring a whole range of expertise to it, to overlook things like our asset management plans and our financial plans, to ensure that they have a real world look at them, not just the council view of them as well. And I think it's important that we get that external view of things and an external truth check with all of this stuff that we do. But at the end of the day, all of that stuff, everything that's recommended from the audit panel comes back to council for approval. We approved the minutes of the meeting earlier. The asset management plans and the finance management plans are approved by council. They're not approved by the audit panel. They may be recommended for approval, but that's a very different thing than having the ultimate responsibility. And I think it's really important that we understand where the panel sits in relationship and what a useful panel it is for council as a regulatory body. And I seek council support for the changes that are proposed here.
Motion is the recommendation that we amend the charter, which includes rotational appointments in terms of reference. All those in favour? Against? Carried. 7.7.2 is the constitution for Alma's Activity Centre Management Committee to be revised. Alderman Campbell, thanks. Alderman Chong, thank you. Speakers? Alderman Chong?
We've discussed it. I think we should support the changes.
Speakers? Put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. And moving on to item 12, Alderman's question time. There are no matters on notice. Questions without notice. I think Alderman Pearce, you get to start the ball rolling.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I'm starting up the old chestnut of Bayfield Street. What time limit is left on these contractors, please?
Mr Mayor, there would be no time limit per se, but I understand practical completion was supposed to be April this year.
Mayor, can I please have the hours these contractors are supposed to be working and the days, because it's just dragging on and dragging on. No, I'm asking that.
Thank you. You don't need to explain the question. It's a good question, Alderman Pearce. Mr Graham, are you able to advise us?
Yes, I'll follow up with that.
Thank you. I think more than Alderman Pearce might be interested in the answer to that. Alderman Doust? Alderman Cusick? Alderman Chong?
Thank you.
Alderman Farnham?
Yes. In relation to contractors working on council land, I've noticed, I drive past the Clarence Plains Rivulet track, which now comes out on Goodwin's Road. After the track had been built by our professional track builders, contractors came in to put in stormwater all the way from the end of the subdivision through to the creek, which is way down the road. So my question is, can we get those contractors to reassess their environmental responsibilities in restitution of council assets? Because in putting gravel back, which looks like a track, it's not actually working the same way as what we had before, where it was mounded and it had guttering along the side. So, and where they've dug up the soil, there's no revegetation, for instance. So there's this huge area of disturbed land with a clay top on it, which is just going to end up full of weeds. So my question is, can we get these contractors to do some restitution in that area, and can we in the future ask the developers who they're working for maybe to have a brief that where they have to talk to our staff about what the needs are, not their own interpretation.
That result in a note back to Wiki Briefing? Thank you.
The South Arm Oval and Calverton Hall has been leased to the South Arm Calverton Hall Inc. since November 1996. The lease has expired 29th of August 2017. Is that lease going to be renewed in the near future? Second question, just an update on the progress of public toilets at Roaches Beach and the Lauderdale Canal.
Roaches Beach will be going out to quotation the next week or two, and
Lauderdale Beach access, where are we with that project? Thank you.
On Friday I took a stroll around the area of Rokeby. These photos were taken in the area closest to Joseph Street and Atkins Street where they terminate. A significant amount of car bodies burnt out in that area. I don't know whether this is a flow-on from remediation that might have been done around the Clarendon Vale area. But I'm just wondering whether we've had any involvement with police on this matter or been investigating the matter at all.
Through Mr Mayor, I'm not aware of it, and by the shaking of heads and others to it, we'll have to check that one out and come back to you. I'm not actually aware of it.
Certainly, yeah, I don't know whether access is being done at the top of the Polo, whether the subdivisions are, but it's coming down the houses and sort of back on.
Thank you.
Two questions. Firstly, in relation, and I think my question should be directed to Mr Lovell in his capacity as the man in the seat. Mr Lovell, I noticed on Sunday that all work has stopped on the Richmond Maze, and my question through you to, through the Mayor to you is that has there been adequate development to actually sustain a further extension on this development, or has it basically stopped and therefore they would need to submit a new DA?
Mr Mayor, it has substantial limits, therefore that permit will go on as long as it takes to finish the project.
And supplementary to that, so that could mean ad infinitum.
Mr Mayor, yes, that's correct.
Thank you. The second question through you to Mr Graham in his capacity as the manager of that department. Mr Graham, what is the current situation with respect to the Kangaroo Bay Hotel apartment development, and has it reached the stage of going to a full appeal hearing?
Well,
I think we better take that back to the GM.
No, well, it would
Can
normally
we take it to him first?
It would normally be a planning matter, not the...
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Happy if you could answer it. Yep. Well, you like to actually, I'll save your butt if I can use it.
Alderman James, just be quiet for a
Yes.
moment.
Yes, okay.
The matter is a matter for planning, and Mr. Lovell would be the appropriate manager if at all, but in this case, the General Manager's offered to answer the question.
Well, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Through Mr Mayor, as I understand it, a date for a full hearing hasn't been set. The matter's still going through mediation.
Okay. Thank you. That brings us to the close of the open session of Council. Once again, I'd like to thank the members of the public for lasting the distance and taking an interest in our affairs. Thank you. Take a motion to move into committee, please. Alderman Chong, second Alderman Turley. All those in favour? Carried unanimously.